is Making Stitches, and this time we hear from Dr. Gemma McKenzie, the woman behind Threads of Protest, a crochet exhibition to raise awareness of maternity rights.
Someone will ask me what my job is, I will tell them, they'll ask more about it, and then I see this kind of penny drop moment where, especially if it's a woman, they start to think about their own maternity experiences and start to think, oh, I didn't realise that I could say no. I thought I had to go along with what was presented to me. And so really the idea came about that I would merge my two passions, crochet and research, human rights and childbirth, and would create a crochet exhibition.
Hello and welcome to Making Stitches podcast. I'm Lindsay. I'm a lifelong crafter and I used to work in broadcasting as a journalist. I love hearing people's stories, so I created this podcast so I could get the best of both worlds, chatting to people about creativity. If you're a crocheter, you may well be aware that yesterday was International Granny Square Day. So if you entered into the spirit of Granny Square Day and have a few squares knocking about that you don't know what to do with, Dr. Gemma McKenzie might be able to help you with that. Gemma is a researcher at King's College London in the Midwifery Department. Her background is in law and human rights in particular. She's looking at birth trauma and obstetric violence in her work and is looking to raise awareness about it. In order to do this, she's turning to crochet, a passion of hers, as well as human rights, and is putting on an exhibition called Threads of Protest next year in Southport in the northwest of England and in London too. Gemma is running crochet workshops and asking people to send her crocheted or knitted squares, which she will then use as a yarn bomb at the exhibition. Now, before I share my chat with Gemma, I have to apologise for any bumps and bangs in the background. It's the school summer holidays here at the moment, and with teenagers in the house, it can be quite noisy at times, so apologies about that. But here's my chat with Gemma now.
I am a researcher at King's College London and I work in the Midwifery Department, but I'm not a midwife.
So what exactly does that mean then?
So my background is in law, so I trained as a lawyer. So I'm interested in human rights. This is the type of work that I've done in the past, human rights work, things about ethics, laws. And so in the midwifery department, even though most of the people there are midwives, I look at things slightly differently. So I'm looking at the ethics and the laws and the human rights, things around consent, all these things connected to birth and maternity care.
Smashing. So a very demanding job, I imagine.
When it's your passion, it's not demanding. It's something that I enjoy, and it's something that I got into based on my own abusive experiences. So it's not, I don't find it demanding as such. I find it actually cathartic. For me, it's a cathartic way of dealing with my own experiences.
Is that something you'd be happy talking about?
Yeah, I mean, so how I got into that job is, as I said, I trained as a lawyer. I did human rights work, I worked with charities, I worked with the police. And then when I got pregnant, I was totally naive to the system. I just went along with what I was told I should do. And what resulted was an extremely abusive birth. So other people will come out of their births and often they'll use the words birth trauma. I used to use that phrase until I got into this line of work, and now I don't use that phrase in relation to my own experiences. I use the phrase obstetric violence, which is basically when the systems or the institutions or even the staff are doing things to you without your consent, without your full knowledge. You're kind of being channeled into interventions. You're kind of very out of control. So these are the things that happened to me. and it left me with PTSD. So I really struggled afterwards with my mental health. And there were two major ways that I dealt with that. So the first was starting every single craft that I could get my hands on, because when you have PTSD, your mind is on overdrive, and you struggle with concentration because you're constantly going over things that have happened in the past. You're on red alert, you're hyper vigilant, you're filled with anxiety and stress. And so I one of the many hobbies I picked up was crochet. And that was really, for me, that was the main hobby or the main craft that would bring me back down. And so that was 14 years ago. And alongside doing the crochet, I also went into the research. So I then did additional qualifications, including a PhD on this issue around maternity rights. And so the two things have kind of come together now in my current role.
And do you want to tell me a little bit about that and your threads of protest?
Yeah, so originally when I started this work, it was, I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago now. I was interested in human rights, as I've mentioned, women's rights, birth and people's rights. And I was particularly interested in how people say no and stop in the maternity system. So people may not realize, but all antenatal care is voluntary. All the care that you get during the birth, having midwives and doctors present, it's entirely voluntary. So none of it is a legal requirement. So theoretically, you could just go through your pregnancy and birth and not engage with the maternity system. And that fascinated me because certainly in my own experiences and the experiences of women I've spoken to, things aren't presented that way, and you feel very much obliged to have things done to you. And you feel it's very difficult to say, no, I don't want that, or please stop what you're doing. And so I then researched women's experiences of free birthing. So for people who don't know what a free birth is, it's when women or birthing people intentionally give birth without midwives or doctors present. And what I discovered when I spoke to women was that many of them either feared obstetric violence or had experienced it. And some of the women's stories were just extraordinary, basically what they'd experienced. And that was resonating with my own personal experience. I also started to volunteer at a charity called AIMS, which is Association for Improvement in the Maternity Services. And that is a human rights charity which supports women and families during pregnancy and birth. And so what I was learning as I was going along is that these human rights violations, because that's what they are just rife throughout the country. They're rife globally. In some countries, it's even worse than in the UK. And of course, you know, as you learn more about it, you realise women are giving birth in prisons, they're giving birth in refugee camps, they're giving birth in poverty. So there's this whole web of violations that are happening to women during pregnancy and childbirth. And so in my academic role, I write about these things, whether that's academic papers or blogs or short articles for AIMS. But I wanted to do something that raised awareness, because what I often experience is someone will ask me what my job is, I will tell them, they'll ask more about it, and then I see this kind of penny drop moment where, especially if it's a woman, they start to think about their own maternity experiences and start to think, oh, I didn't realize that I could say no. I thought I had to go along with what was presented to me. And so really the idea came about that I would merge my two passions, crochet and research, human rights and childbirth, and would create a crochet exhibition, which seems totally bizarre, but there is some theory underneath it, some foundational theory, because there's a history of women protesting with thread, hundreds of years of women doing that, because women were typically removed from the official art, so they weren't allowed to put their artwork in galleries and be part of the artistic societies and things of that nature. So women were left with their creative expression was limited to things such as embroidery, later on knitting, crochet and things of that nature. And so that was really their vehicle for expression and also any form of protest. So there's a whole world of that sits behind this idea of using crochet as a way of raising awareness of human rights in childbirth. So the exhibition itself has a few parts, a few components. One of the components is a big public engagement piece based on the ideas of craftivism and yarn bombing, in which anyone around the world can donate a granny square. It originally started off just crochet, but then so many people said to me, can I knit? So it's a granny square with crochet or a knitted square, about 15 by 15 centimeters of any design, any color, to basically bring into the collection of other granny squares and yarn bomb part of the exhibition space. And so far, we've got a year to go until the actual first start of the exhibition, and there's over 600 squares being donated already. So there is a lot of squares coming in. So this is obviously resonating with a lot of people. And so we've got that arm of the exhibition. And then we've also got a second section, which is where I have teamed up professional crochet artists or textile artists with charities or experts to make pieces on very specific topics. So we've got one on LGBTQ rights in the maternity services. So that is being created by Sophie Neville and with expert input from Dr. Marie Greenfield, who is an expert on the lived experience of giving birth in the maternity system as somebody from the LGBTQ community. We've also got a second piece with Ames, and the artist is Barbara Tuati Evans, and they're creating a piece that is on kind of general human rights in childbirth. We've also got a third piece, which is being created by Helen Davies, and she has teamed up, or I have teamed it up with Stevie McKenzie, who she's a birth worker, but she also experienced the maternity system by trying to train as a midwife. And one of the things with the exhibition is this is not an anti-midwife or anti-doctor exhibition. It is about highlighting the problems, and Stevie's experience really demonstrated how toxic the maternity system can be for staff as well as the people that are using it. And so Helen and Stevie have come together to create a piece demonstrating the difficulties for staff working in that system. And then we've got a fourth piece by Madeline Famariwa, who will be working with a charity called Refugee Women Connect in Liverpool. And we are going to create a piece that demonstrates not necessarily just the refugee and asylum seeker experience, but also what people from that community would like to see. Because there are some additional difficulties for women going through the system who are from that community. So we'll hopefully showcase that in the exhibition, which will run for 3 months in the Atkinson in Southport from July 2025 to September 2025. And then it will move to London, to the Curiosity Cabinet on the Strand in central London, which is quite scary. And that will go from September 2025 to January 2026. And then I'm hoping to get another gallery, so we're in talks about that.
Wow. Did you ever imagine when you came up with the idea to match crochet with your work that it would grow to the size that it has?
No, and one of the things, so I've had very generous funding from 3 different funders. So King's College London is funding some of this. The Economic and Social Research Council is funding some of it too. And also the Being Human Festival is also funding part of this, because we've also run workshops, crochet workshops. So we've had people, beginners, basically come in to learn crochet. Some of those beginners are associated with various charities, and some of them have just been in general workshops in local yarn shops. But when I came up with the idea, I envisioned like maybe 100 squares in a church hall for a weekend, and I didn't, not that I didn't think people would get involved, it's just the unknown. And I often thought to myself, it could be feast or famine. It could either be, no one's really donating, even though people think the idea might be good. Are people actually going to do it? Are they actually going to crochet a square and send it in the post? Well, clearly, yes, they are. But I didn't know it at the time. But what seems to have happened, it was really triggered by the Atkinson in Southport, because I had this kind of fantasy, because it's a really lovely gallery, a lovely space. It's kind of museum, gallery, cafe, theatre, studio, library, like a big community space. And I had this fantasy that, maybe I could put some of these squares in some part of the gallery space, thinking they might give me a very small walled area. But they were really generous and actually offered me originally a massive gallery space that was the type of space you'd see in a museum, but it would have been in 2027, and that was too far in the future for this particular project, for the funding and things like that I had in place. So I've gone for a smaller room in 2025, but I actually saw the room again this morning, and it's actually the perfect space, because I think it will be so impactful to see all those squares in that particular space, because it's the right size to be impressive, but also it's not too overwhelming a space that there's a chance I can't fill it with squares. I think it's the type of space that will be covered wall to wall. Fingers crossed, but I think it's doable. That's definitely doable, that room. So it's really, it was triggered by them. And then as soon as I had the gallery space, it becomes more of a professional project then. And I think people take it a bit more seriously and want to get involved.
Now, all these squares that have been sent to you so far, have people shared their own experiences of trauma and abuse during childbirth, or have they just been coming like anonymously through the post?
It's a range, really. So a few people slip in notes, and which is really impactful. But of course, I wouldn't put them in the private notes to me. So yes, I think some people have been galvanized based on their own experiences. Some people just send them anonymously, and I can only presume that's been linked to a personal experience. On Instagram, other people are more vocal about their contributions and they put their own pictures up. But I know in those cases, some of those women have experienced that level of abuse as well. So I think, yes, some people are motivated by their own personal experiences. When I've been doing the workshops, it is also surprising how many people open up about their own personal experiences, even though during the workshops no one's required to talk about any of their personal life. But some people do, especially in the older generation. And I find some of their stories the most shocking when women in the 70s and the 80s are describing things that have happened to them, that it just takes it to the next level, some of the things that they say, because they're describing having no, or believing they've got no rights and being infantilized. One woman was slapped by the midwife. It's appalling, the care. I say care in inverted commas, what women are describing has happened to them. And I think one of the things that Threads of Protest is doing is encouraging people to think about their experiences, but also to talk about them, not necessarily with me, but with other people, and to share their experiences and to consider whether what happened to them was right. And I think that's important for women to reflect on.
So, would you say that the point of this this Threads of Protest exhibition is to unearth stories from the past that people can deal with them, I guess, and acknowledge that they've happened to them, or is it to raise awareness to try and get people to stand up for themselves in future and know their rights in a delivery room, or is it a combination?
Well, originally, academics are really encouraged to write all their academic research and get it out to the public. But of course, lots of academic research isn't really accessible with technical language and things of that nature. So the original idea was to use crochet to raise the point, to say, kind of highlight these things are going on, people are researching them. I'm one of those people. Maybe you want to look at some of the blogs or do some of your own little investigations, go online, have a little think about it. So that's really the underlying goal. But then you have these little offshoots of what is actually happening, in that women naturally, not in all cases, but in some cases, will open up or will express their experiences through the crochet. So it's a means of either demonstrating an experience or expressing an emotion based on that experience. Or even if women haven't given birth, or maybe has a fantastic birth, it's just about also women and crocheters and knitters coming together for a shared cause. Even if it hasn't personally affected you, it is affecting many women in this country and around the world. So it's an opportunity to just be part of something. And there's lots of women who will have seen on the news some of the headlines that have come out recently about maternity scandals, and about people may have come across this birth trauma inquiry report that's been out in the last month or so, last few weeks. These are all things that are, or the people behind those reports and those scandals, or writing about those scandals, are trying to highlight this issue. And this is just another way of doing it, of getting people to look at the issue and think, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for other women? What does it mean for my own daughters?
So if somebody wants to contribute a square or several squares to the exhibition, what's the best way for them to go about it?
You can send a square to Threads of Protest, PO Box 239, Liverpool, L37 8YU. There's also lots of information on my website, which is www.gemmamckenzie.co.uk. There's lots of information on there, and it also repeats the address to send your squares to.
Fantastic. Well, I'll make sure all that information's in the show notes for this episode. So if people have been compelled to get their hooks and get busy, or their knitting needles for that matter, and contribute some squares to you, they'll be able to find you and make sure it gets to them. So you said you're a year away from your exhibition. You've got 600 squares already. Is there a closing date for when you're going to stop welcoming squares?
Yeah, so I haven't got a closing date yet, because if I get a third gallery, maybe it'll be a bigger space. Maybe we can continue to collect squares. If I get inundated over the next 6 months, then I will have to close it. But so far, there's no deadline, and I look forward to receiving people's squares if they want to make some. One thing I will say as well is people have really started to be creative with the squares. So beading, sewing, spray paint. I got one that was made from copper, so copper wire. So people are really thinking outside of the box. And of course, if people just want to do the normal granny square, that's fine. But there is, if you have other ideas, you'd be welcome to send something really unusual and unique in, just as long as it's 15 by 15 centimetres.
Fantastic. Oh, well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Gemma. It's been absolutely fascinating hearing about your work and how it's married with crochet, because really it's amazing when two parts of your life just collide in that way, isn't it?
It is unbelievable. And as my family say, there's only one person who could combine obstetric violence and crochet in the job. Just a totally unusual combination.
You can get crochet or any kind of craft into any kind of situation. I'm sure there's a way.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, well, thanks again for your time. It's been really, really interesting, Gemma.
Well, thank you for having me.
My thanks to Gemma for taking the time to speak to me for Making Stitches. If you want to find out more about Gemma's work, or if you want to send a square for her yarn bomb at the Threads of Protest exhibition, you can find all the details for that in the show notes for this episode, both on the podcast app you may be listening to this on and on my website, makingstitchespodcast.com. Making Stitches podcast is not sponsored by anyone, but it does cost money to produce. If you enjoy listening and you'd like to support me on my podcast making adventure, you could buy me a coffee through my Ko-fi page, or buy some podcast merchandise or one of my crochet patterns on my Etsy shop. The links to both of those are also in the show notes to this episode. Now, I've decided to take the rest of the summer off from podcasting. It's been a bit of a juggle to this point, so it feels like the right things to do. Don't worry though, I promise I will be back again soon, all being well in the latter part of September. Until then, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, do look after yourself and enjoy your crafting.